Hello and welcome. I'm so glad you're here. I'd like to take a closer look at something that I mentioned in the last video with respect to how to respond in our lives when things show up that are what we would perceive as unwanted. And what I said in that video was just to suspend any tendency to think of it as wrong. And I want to expand that to include our perception of things in the quote outside world, in the outer world. There are many, many things we have become aware of that we can see or hear about or know that we would most certainly describe as unwanted. And I'm suggesting that even with those things that seem to be so clearly wrong, that we suspend any condemnation of them. Suspend. And I know this might seem like a tall order, but I want to bring into this conversation that we cannot ever deactivate condemnation with more condemnation. We can never deactivate hatred with hatred. We can never deactivate fear with more fear. It just doesn't work that way energetically. And if you really can feel into this, that third dimension of separation consciousness in which we believe these false and painful things, that whole dimension came into being because of a judgment of something as being wrong. Wrongness is a concept. It's a concept that's given life in this third dimensional consciousness. Without a concept of bad or wrong, there is no such thing. There is no such thing that can be enacted or outpictured or reflected back to us. It's all conceptual first before it becomes actual. So in the absence of the concept of wrong and bad, we have only good. And that's fundamentally the difference between the third dimension and the fifth dimension of consciousness. When we have a concept of wrongness and badness, then we actually can create and have created many experiences that feel exactly that way, wrong and bad. But we can't get from there to here by continuing to make things wrong. We cannot do it. Only love is going to lift us to a level of consciousness where those other vibrations become inactive. So we must find ways to anchor into love, to center into love, even when we are able to observe things that are very definitely not loving. What I think is so helpful to know is that when any of us individually and all of us collectively, or any number of us collectively, choose to anchor into love, even upon the observance of something unloving, that is part of what's helping us shift to the fifth dimension of consciousness. And what I mean by that is consciousness is energy. And the more of us who are choosing loving focuses, loving thoughts, loving perspectives, peaceful perspectives, joyful perspectives, those vibrations are becoming stronger and stronger and stronger in the collective. And it has been shown that there have been studies that have proven, for example, that people in a certain geographical area, a certain number of people in a certain area are all meditating, the incidence of crime decrease. The incidence of people going to emergency rooms decreases. So it literally has an effect because we are all connected. And when we vibrate in a really coherent, empowered, loving, peaceful way, I call it feeding it into the grid. We're feeding that into the grid of human consciousness, which makes it easier for everyone else to access it. So that is how we make a really important, vital contribution to this shift. Now, we may also be guided to take some kind of action with respect to something that we're observing, but the action will only be truly effective if it's arising from love, if it's arising from a genuine impulse to take action, as opposed to if it arises from righteousness or condemnation of what we're viewing as wrong. I want to really emphasize the key to moving through this fourth dimension into the fifth is one of suspending all judgment and condemnation, either of self or of others. just suspending it. That does not mean we are agreeing with anything that others are doing that is unloving. It doesn't mean that at all. In fact, what it means is we recognize that the only way to dissolve those thought forms, to deactivate them, is by activating the ones that we desire. And we can all do that moment by moment by moment. And that is what creates the shift. On a related note, there are often things that show up either in our lives personally or in someone else's life that we just don't understand. They make no sense to us. It is so easy for us to go into, I got to figure this out mode, whether it's regarding someone else's actions or our own. And yet it is in that figuring out, as I've mentioned before, that we can keep active the very things we wish to render inactive. So there's a mantra that I created a little while ago that I have found tremendously useful, and it goes like this. My understanding is not always required. Only my love is always required. So I offer that to you in those moments when either something shows up in your personal life that you didn't expect and you don't want, and you can't figure out how that happened, or when something shows up in the world at large or in someone's life that you know that just doesn't make sense. If it isn't immediately clear what's going on, don't try to figure it out. Don't try to find fault anywhere. Just pause. Again, come back to the heart and remind yourself that in any given moment, your understanding is not required, but in every moment, love is required. That simple practice is a very powerful one, and I hope you're willing to experiment with it. Thank you for being here. I look forward to seeing you next time.